Hello, everyone. Welcome to our belated start. At 7:15, I will call to order the meeting of the Essex Planning Board. There's 5 of us here in attendance with me this evening. Ruth?
I'll call the Board of Selectmen to order.
Thank you. So thank you for bearing with us through a few technical glitches here. I think we're up and running. Unfortunately, Andrea Harris-Long is ill this evening and couldn't attend in person. She is online on Zoom, but she's going to stay on mute, I believe. Courtney Lewis is here from the MAPC, and he's going to lead us through the presentation. The format of this evening is to have a brief presentation of where we are on the project, and then towards the end of the meeting, we're going to have more of a working session, chance for people to give feedback, and Courtney will walk us through all of that. So that said, I will turn the meeting over to Courtney Lewis and go from there. Thank you.
All right. Can you hear me?
No.
No.
You have to get closer, I think.
Hello. Testing.
I'm not.
Testing.
Is it?
That's good.
Okay.
We're hearing you at home when you talk.
Can everyone
so
hear?
We can at home.
Courtney?
Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for bearing with us. My name is Courtney Lewis. I'm a senior planner at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. I have been working alongside Andrea Harris-Long, who's also a senior planner at MAPC and the project manager for this bylaw project. I'm also joined this evening by my colleague, Christian Brandt, who is a community engagement, he's the community engagement manager at MAPC, and we're very happy to be here. Before we jump into things, just full moment of transparency. Getting here this evening has been like being in a Chevy Chase movie. So we definitely had quite the adventure getting here this evening, which is why we're a bit delayed. So again, thank you for bearing with us, and thank you all who have joined us virtually via Zoom. We're here tonight to talk about the Essex zoning bylaw project. Just to note that this tonight's presentation will be recorded, so people will have time to review and go back over the content at their leisure. This is a look at tonight's agenda. We had originally planned for this to be a mirrored experience for people providing feedback and input in person as well as virtually. We ran into a technical difficulty in the virtual space, so that will launch tomorrow at some time, and links will be provided on the project website as well as the town site. So we'll be sure to, and you'll also receive a notification if you registered for this evening's event. But as I mentioned, this is a look at tonight's agenda. We'll start with a quick welcome and introductions. I'll walk you through the project and the process and how we arrived here. We'll talk about, we'll recap phase 1, and then we'll talk about phase 2, which is where we are now. And then the future phase 3, which will take place later on in the spring, and then we'll transition to the engagement events. So this is the project team. As I mentioned, MAPC has been working with the town to review and update its zoning bylaw. This effort has been led and guided by the planning board in partnership with the Board of Selectmen. We have also started working with a group of local residents and business owners that we call zoning champions, and they will be working with us throughout the process to help get the word out and also provide additional information about updates and the process itself. So taking a quick look at the project background, as I mentioned, this project will unfold in 3 phases. We are currently in phase 2. In phase 1 was all about looking at the existing zoning bylaw. So Andrea and I did a comprehensive review of the town's zoning bylaw, and we looked at areas that needed work, areas that were working well, and through that process, we held 2 public forums and gathered feedback from the community. We also conducted an online survey. And at the tail end of phase 1, we also worked with the town to apply for a Community One Stop for Growth grant with the state in order to fund the subsequent phases of this process. Phase 2 is recodification and community vision. So in phase 1, we looked at an approach to phase 2, and we provided the town with 2 different options on a way to update and improve the zoning bylaw. And so the town decided to do, as a first step, they created a prioritized list of potential updates, which we'll ask for feedback on this evening. And as a first step, we plan to recodify or reorganize, reformat, and update the bylaw and ensure that any future amendments or changes align with the community's vision for the town's growth in the coming years. Once we've gathered input and we have crafted a vision for future zoning in the town, then we'll transition to phase 3, which will focus on making modifications and amendments to the bylaw. So just as a quick recap, what is zoning and why is it important? Historically, zoning was put in place to help protect the health, safety, and welfare of the community by separating out uses. Zoning regulates how land is used across the town, and it also shapes buildings, homes, and neighborhoods. And that's fine. Go ahead. So in phase 1, I mentioned that Andrea and I did a comprehensive review of the bylaw. We then produced a diagnostic report that included a list of recommendations on potential ways for the town to move forward and making improvements to the bylaw. Our goals in phase 1 were to understand existing land use patterns, gauge input from the public on their perception of the existing bylaw, and also look at opportunities to incorporate best practices for future changes to the bylaw. So as I mentioned, we had several discussions and collected information from the community. We got the word out through flyers, through the project website and email lists and listservs, via social media. We held 2 virtual community forums, and between those 2 forums, we had approximately 166 participants. we held two focus groups, and we also conducted stakeholder interviews with residents as well as town staff, like the building inspector, and we also launched the online survey, which received approximately 428 responses. So one of the things that we asked in phase one in the survey was we asked residents to tell us what some of the challenges were that they saw or felt were important in terms of zoning, in terms of the town's existing zoning, and what areas were most important to focus on. And one of the most important, there was a long list of comments, but some of the highest ranking themes or comments were sustainable growth in a way that's appropriate and aligns with the town's existing character. We also received several comments about looking at incompatible uses being located next to other uses. We discussed some of the physical and environmental constraints for growth in the town, both from an infrastructural standpoint as well as natural barriers and environmental considerations in terms of impact for future development. As I mentioned, we came up with a list of recommendations. There were 8 overall recommendations. The first one was to establish zoning districts and a use table that organize zoning districts and address non-conforming uses. The second recommendation was updating use regulations, dimensional and development standards. The third was removing barriers to expand housing options in the town. The fourth recommendation was aligning zoning with the general bylaws as well as the community's values. Recommendation 5 was making the bylaw more user-friendly and easier to interpret, both from a resident standpoint, but also from town officials who have to make decisions and have to interpret the bylaw. Looking at improvements to the application review process was recommendation 6. Expanding local staffing capacity to help adequately administer and enforce the zoning bylaws was recommendation 7, and developing a robust community engagement strategy to ensure that any decisions made were in line and reflected the community's values. So now we're here in phase 2, which we've titled Recodification and Community Vision. Again, as a first step, we're looking at making the bylaw more user-friendly and intuitive, and we're also looking to gather feedback from the community in order to help guide the planning board and the town in making future decisions on amendments. So our goals for this phase are update and amend the existing zoning and land use regulations to better reflect and align with community values, create a more user-friendly bylaw, guide growth and improve the quality of future development, and ensure that any changes, any existing regulations or future changes are consistent with with state and with state regulations as well as recent statutes such as 3A. So what is zoning recodification? What does it mean? Essentially, it's a process we like to think of it as kind of a spring cleaning or a tidying up of the zoning bylaw. Recodification means to recode a set of laws, rules, or more simply, to rearrange, reformat, and reorganize the bylaw. This is essentially what Phase 2 entails, and some of the proposed changes are consistent formatting, numbering, and labeling, reorganizing certain sections of the bylaw so that they're more intuitively located and more user-friendly, consolidating definitions that are currently scattered all throughout the bylaw, correcting any grammatic and any typos in the existing bylaws, and ensuring that the text is consistent with state statutes and regulations. As a part of Phase 2, we are not proposing any substantive changes. We're literally reorganizing existing content. The wording and the language outside of making edits and corrections to grammar will be verbatim, word for word, as it is in the existing bylaws. So the community may be questioning why have we decided to do this now? One of the reasons is we're following up, the town is following up and taking action on the recommendations that were proposed in Phase 1. And they are really trying to do that at a pace that is comfortable for the community and comfortable and digestible for the community. The current bylaw has antiquated wording and is a bit outdated, and so there's also other issues that makes it a bit harder to administer. And it also sets, doing this process also sets the town up with a framework so that they can make future changes. So it's easier to make future changes at a pace that our residents and the town are comfortable with. The time to do this work is also important because there are two warrants on there are two articles on the warrant for town meeting, Articles 18 and 19, which will ask town meeting members to vote in order to. The articles will ask town meeting members to vote to approve the recodified version of the zoning bylaw. So this is what essentially is proposed for the changes. We're looking at taking the bylaw and reorganizing it from 16 different sections to 10, and also locating information in sections of the bylaw where it makes better sense, and it's easier to find information and content. I believe you received a handout this evening that kind of summarizes where information will be.
We didn't do the handout. We did a handout for town meeting. We didn't pass it out tonight.
Okay,
Sorry.
sorry. But if we go to the next slide, this will help this will help you visualize what we mean. So for the first two sections, we're essentially carrying those over, making no changes to those sections. For section 3, we're relocating land use regulations into section 6-4, which will be use regulations. For section 4, we are moving that to section 6-9, which will be titled nonconforming uses and structures. We're moving supplementary provisions to section 6-7, which essentially will include the existing content with a few additions. Section 6, which is off-street parking and loading, will be relocated to section 6, development regulations, along with signage, which is currently in section 6-7. Administration and Board of Appeals, which are sections 6-8 and 6-9, will be relocated to section 6-10, which is now titled Administration and Regulations. Section 6-10, which currently has section 6, 11, and 12, will now be housed, are proposed to be housed in section 6-3, which is titled Establishment of Districts, and essentially this just groups all of the town's existing zoning districts into one section of the bylaw, so that it's easier to compare and contrast dimensional standards and regulations for each zoning district. There will be no changes to sections 6-13. It will carry over and be relocated in section 6-8, which will still be the open space residential or OSRD section. Section 6-14 will be stricken, as well as
Sorry to interrupt, but for the recodification that we're presenting right now, 614 and 616 got stuck in additional regulations as a housekeeping right now, because we're not taking anything out yet.
And while we're on the topic, I just want to mention to everyone that the overview of the recodification is already up on the town website if you go to the town meeting tab, as is the 58-page complete version of the recodification. So people can study that and look at that even now, between now and town meeting. You don't have to wait to town meeting to get to see the handout.
and excuse me for misspeaking. And 615, which is the downtown zoning district, again will be moved to establishment of districts with the other overlay and existing base districts for the town. And I'll talk very briefly about phase 3, which again will not take place until after town meeting. But essentially in phase 3, we'll take feedback from the town, and we'll start to make additional changes to update and modernize the zoning bylaw. So I just wanted to share a few examples of communities that have recently undergone a similar process, and also show examples of ways that some of the existing information could be better organized. So in Arlington, in their bylaw, they have color-coded sections to act as visual cues for users of the bylaw. They also use a series of series of diagrams and illustrations to help support definitions and specifications for signage, for parking, for measurements. In Ipswich, they have consolidated their uses into a use regulation table, and they've also provided this 3-tier classification where they define the use classification, the use category, and then the use type. So it's, for example, a single-family home, they've defined the classification as a principal use for the land. They've also talked about the category, which is residential, and then the type of use. So single-family, two-family dwelling, multifamily dwelling, and they've also in the vertical columns, they've provided the various zoning districts throughout the town. In Newton, again, they use graphics to help depict some of those more complex measurements or definitions, and showing illustrations of principal and accessory structures, as well as lot coverage and setbacks, as well as building height. And they've also organized those dimensional standards into a table to better organize the information. As I mentioned earlier, Phase 3 will be supported by zoning ambassadors, and this is a diverse group of Essex residents and business owners from different geographical areas of the town, who also hold different perspectives about zoning, land use, and the future of the town. And as I mentioned, they will help assist in spreading the word and helping us to provide residents with information, both on changes and updates, and they will help shape how we communicate and engage with you all moving forward. As I mentioned, at the end of Phase 1, we provided those recommendations, and we presented that information to the planning board. They then took the information that we provided, as well as community input, and created a list of potential updates for future amendments. And this is what we want to help get better clarity on and refinement on moving forward. So the first priority update or proposed update would be addressing definitions, providing clear, modern, and a workable set of definitions will make the zoning bylaw easier for users to interpret, as well as town officials to administer and enforce. The second recommendation, or the second priority update, is to codify the general zoning district. Some of you may have seen this graphic from Phase 1, which notes that 98% of the town's land area lies in the town's unofficial general zoning district. The district itself, although people recognize it and talk about it, it's not codified or documented in the town's existing zoning bylaw. The three districts that are defined and documented are the Central Canomo Point zoning district, the Southern Canomo Point zoning district, and the Downtown zoning district. The town also has 3 zoning overlays, which are closely tied to some of the environmental components of the town. And just to further emphasize the existing bylaws, essentially any resident that owns a lot or property within that general zoning district is allowed to have any use on that land, whether it's residential, commercial, or industrial, provided that the use meets the dimensional requirements as specified in the town's existing zoning bylaw. And hopefully this graphic expresses that in a more visual way. Essentially, if a commercial use, if a resident had a commercial use and that use met the frontage and lot dimensions needed for a commercial use, it could, the way that the town's existing bylaw is written, that commercial use could be positioned right next door to other residential uses. Some people have varied opinions about it, and we're not here to say one way or the other whether that's a good or a bad thing. We're simply here to assist. We're here to report on what we see as potential issues or things to consider and present that information to the community. And it's you're in the driver's seat and you make the decision at the end of the day. Another potential update is an update to the uses. The uses listed in the existing bylaw in section 6-3.1, they lack precision and they're somewhat vague. One example is the current bylaw lacks a classification for public or institutional uses, and through our conversations with residents as well as doing some of the stakeholder interviews in Phase 1, we learned that the town, there were some challenges with permitting the town's new public safety building. Another potential update is site plan review. And this is a regulatory tool that communities use that allows them to review a proposed development to assure that the project meets specific development standards and complies with local zoning regulations. And also, it allows the community time to determine whether or not the proposed project would have an adverse effect on the community. It usually focuses on things like parking, traffic, drainage, roadway construction, signage and utilities, screening and buffering, with landscaping, and it helps both the town and the developer or proposing the project come to help. It helps both sides produce the best design for the community. Another potential update is looking at affordable housing, and that's both naturally occurring affordable housing as well as deed restricted affordable housing. During phase one, several residents emphasized a need for a wider variety of housing options. The current bylaw does not address some of the innovative housing options that are included in some of the more recently updated bylaws and ordinances, things such as accessory dwelling units, cottage housing, live-work units, and tiny homes are not addressed. And during phase one, 64% of survey respondents noted that they had a need or desired to see accessory dwelling units be permitted in the town. And this could be, this is an option that would allow for things like older residents who are looking to downsize, as well as residents who would like to have multi-generational housing on their property. Another potential update is scenic roads. So the town has 3 designated scenic roads. However, and they are noted in the, I think in the town's general bylaws. However, they are not mentioned in the zoning bylaw. Another potential update or amendment is to special permits, and looking at which essentially authorizes the planning board or the special permit granting authority for the town to essentially it's authorization from the planning board to construct a building or establish a use that's not allowed by right. So I have done a lot of talking, and I'm sure there are several questions. So I want to take a moment to hear from the audience, both here in person as well as virtually. Feel free to submit any questions you may have in the chat. Sure.
I would just, before we get into questions, I just wanted to clarify a couple of issues from the planning board's perspective and how we're going to be moving through this project, because there's sort of a 2 tracks to this effort, and one is the work that we're doing with MAPC as part of these forums and part of the updates that we're going to be preparing. That work goes on while MAPC is on board, and we have their services through, I think, June of 2024. However, that does not mean that we'll have all the updates done, because as Courtney mentioned, the process that we want to sort of unroll is gradual and step by step, so that people have an opportunity to learn what changes are being proposed and getting familiar with them. So it's going to be over the course probably of several years as we work to update various parts of the bylaw, because overhauling everything that Courtney's talked about in the next couple of town meetings would be a Herculean task, and none of us want to learn that much about zoning that fast. So that said, Courtney did a great job of presenting the article that we have on town meeting warrant, which is the recodification or the reorganization of our existing bylaw. And he showed you the categories, how we're moving things around. What's important to remember about this article is that the language and the intent of our current bylaw does not change at all. We're not proposing any substantive changes to it. We are simply moving all the existing language into new spots in the bylaw. And this is going to help us in the future when we do go to make changes, to be able to put them in their new home in the right spot that makes sense for a bylaw that can be amended easily. As you've seen, we have one general use zoning district, and in recent years we've created 3 smaller zoning districts, and they just get sort of tacked on to the end of the bylaw as a whole new section, whereas now they'll all be living in one section that is establishment of districts. And if at some time in the future we codify our general use district or look at other types of districts, then they have a home and they just continue in that rather than enlarge the bylaw with additional sections. So that's what's coming at town meeting is just that. Our Article 19 is a couple of typos, honestly. It's a real nothing article. We will have a public hearing on that, as is required for bylaw articles, and that's next Wednesday night, same time, same place, in this room. We will be going over that in more detail as part of the required public hearing that we hold before the town meeting. Anyway, I just wanted to clarify that because there's a lot of material that MAPC is working on and presenting, but just so people know that we'll be taking a very measured approach as we go through these changes. Thanks. Now you can ask your questions.
There is one question in the chat. It says, can you give an example of what the proposed clarifications in Phase 2 will prevent, limit, or clearly allow?
That is going to be the focus of a lot of the public outreach. We're trying to gauge what people are interested in changing, updating, and amending. A couple of issues are, we're going to talk about zoning districts, but we're also not going to be jumping into trying to draw the town into zoning districts right away, because that's a big job, and that requires a lot of public outreach and a lot of understanding for residents and business owners to understand what those changes would look like. So that may be a long-term goal, but it's not an immediate goal. But in the shorter term, we're looking at better understanding things like the site plan review process, and can we make the site plan review, is this working? Okay, in making the site plan review process more transparent and open, and providing notifications to abutters, things like that. So those are some of the things we're starting to think about. We're going to be looking at what should be in special permit categories. We have a series. We have, I think, 13 or 14 different special permit categories right now. We're going to be looking at what might be other appropriate categories. So those are a couple of things that we're looking at, but part of the project effort right now is to understand what residents are concerned about in the bylaw, what they would like to see changed, and what they do not want to see changed. So we're not set on anything. We know that the bylaw needs updating, and there's some parts of it that we feel could be better done. So the planning board has a set of priorities of our own based on our experience with using and enforcing the bylaw. But we're also looking for public input, which is part of the reason for having all these forums, part of all the outreach that was done in phase one, which informed a lot of the approaches that we're taking now. And then we also have the zoning ambassadors who are, as Courtney explained, residents who will be a resource for our friends and neighbors to learn more about the project and also to give feedback about their concerns or what they do or do not like.
Do we have any? I meant to acknowledge you as we were talking through that slide. Do we have any zoning ambassadors in the room at the moment? So these are the people that you will. These are the people that you should definitely become friends with throughout this process. They will definitely be able to provide information, but also gather your thoughts, your comments, and bring that information back to the project team as we work throughout the project.
Oh.
And we had another comment. It just says, "I like this logical and paced approach. We won't be drinking from a fire hose, and folks will have time to respond as we walk along." Another question just came in. Is the town trying to get Essex out of the 3A requirements?
3A requirements. We have a handout on that, and we actually just put the finishing touches on that today. It's available here at the forum. We'll make sure it goes up online for people to read. What is transpired, and I'll try and do this in a nutshell with 3A requirements, is that we have worked through the process with the assistance of MAPC. They have really done the legwork for us and investigated what those requirements are and determined how Essex does or does not meet them. So the process that has unfolded so far is that the state required all towns within the MBTA area to submit an action plan with respect to how they were going to requirements of the new 3A statute. There are 4 categories of being an MBTA town. One, obviously, is if you have a station, a railroad station, or a T station in your town. And the lowest category falls to what they call adjacent communities. And then there's another category for adjacent small communities, which is sort of the lowest category of requirements that you can have. That's us. We are an adjacent small community with a requirement to be able to demonstrate that we have an existing zoning district in town that has the capacity, not having the units or anything like that, has the capacity to provide 83 multifamily units. So there's nothing in the law that requires you to either provide those units or anything other than to just demonstrate that you have the capacity. So Dana worked with Brendan to submit our plan to the state, and we got an interim approval that said that our action plan was accepted. And the way I like to describe this is we got an action plan approved that had exactly no actions in it. So what they have in essence said is we're approving your no action plan. So Essex right now, to the interpretation of everyone sitting at this table, is compliant. They haven't given us our final compliance because the state hasn't gotten to that stage yet. But we got an approved interim compliance, and we will in the next couple of months be submitting materials that is virtually the same thing, saying, hey, we're still compliant. We still have the capacity for those 83 units in our downtown district. And we expect that we will receive a certificate of compliance at that time. So there is nothing about 3A that is actually, from what we can see, going to affect anything that we need to do in town here. Did that answer that?
And there's nothing else currently in the chat. The person says thank you.
I have a question in the room.
If you don't mind, for the TV viewers, if you could go on the microphone, they won't hear you. Thank you.
Is it the intent of the review to make the requirements stringent enough for new units to be built so that there would be an elimination of a, quote, approval not required kind of situations. What is the, when you get all this codified and get all this labeled and everything, what is it going to help us do to eliminate random kinds of things happening without a strict review?
About what kind of review?
For new buildings or, use of land, so that there isn't this approval not required kind of a thing.
So approval not required is actually, it's a process where a property owner can subdivide a piece of property into lots that meet existing zoning criteria. So approval not required is strictly a division of land that meets our zoning bylaw. So that doesn't permit a use. It doesn't necessarily even grant that the potential building is in compliance with zoning regulations. It's strictly something that a person takes to the registry to record on their deed. I'm kind of reading between the lines in your question, but I think what we don't have is a way to govern or approve or deny uses on a piece of property. We have one general use district that allows a single use as long as it meets the zoning criteria on a piece of property. Excuse me. The process to either put a new structure on a property or change the use of a property is through the process of site plan review. The site plan review process offers the planning board an opportunity to put requirements on a use and suggest changes or modifications. It does not allow the planning board to deny a use. If it's a use that's permitted as of right in our general district bylaw right now, you can put that anywhere. So that's something that we're really trying to gauge how people feel about that, and do we want to have a stricter site plan review process that includes a possibility of denial or more stringent regulations. So that's something we're trying to understand. Is the site plan review process rigorous enough to really protect the community the way we want to protect it? And that's part of the public outreach process, that we want to understand what residents want to see. Some people like the fact that there's no regulation and they can do whatever they want with their land. There's, I think, a greater number of people, from what I'm hearing, that are worried about having uses that aren't suited to certain areas.
Yeah.
So,
Well, thank you. That's good. I'm all for that.
see.
As far as that review process is concerned, it takes into account density, storage, and all these kinds of things too, right?
It doesn't really account for density. Our minimum lot standards take into account density. Sewerage is something that's been limiting development in Essex for years, because there's a certain capacity that's there, and if you don't have the capacity to build more, then you just can't build right now. And that's something that the community needs to think about, because it could change. Gloucester is rebuilding the sewage plant, and there's also talk starting of a regional sewer system. So if more sewage capacity becomes available to Essex, there could be more development here. And that's one of the reasons that we're also looking at having the community conversations and understanding what we want our community to look like, so that we can put the guardrails in place that will help keep Essex looking like the majority of us want it to. So
And still deal with the 83 units.
The 83 units is not a real thing. It's a capacity, it's a theory, it's a concept. So we aren't under any kind of requirement to actually provide those units, ever.
Yep.
It's demonstrating that on the property that we have, and with the zoning bylaw that we have in place, those units could exist if someone else wanted to build them. But we're not under any kind of requirement to actually affect those. We don't have to, at some point, say, hey, look, Massachusetts, we have 83 units. All we have to say is, hey, we have the capacity for 83 units. And if you pick up the handout in the back, okay, yeah, that's,
Well, thank you for all your hard work. Thank you.
sure. Thank you for coming. Come up to the microphone, please.
Yeah, I want to first echo Gabe's sentiment. You guys have been great with communication and outreach and the surveys and all. We really appreciate the opportunity for the input here. My first question is, I may have misunderstood a graphic about the 3 different phases, but it looked like it was one of the slides early in the presentation here. It looked like phase 3 was meant to wrap up by November of this year, but your explanation made it sound like it's going to spill over at least until sometime next year.
So we have a sort of a limited engagement of our zoning expert consultants with MAPC, and that's through a project grant that the town secured. So in the time that we have with MAPC, we want to get all the work done. We want to get these changes written, but we're going to keep them in a drawer for now. The public will know about them. It's a very transparent process, but we're not, we could potentially change the general use district. We could look at other districts. We could look at rewriting the site plan review. We could add special permits. There's a whole lot that can be improved in our bylaw, but the town meeting to approve that it just wouldn't be possible. It's too much material for a town meeting to digest. So what I'm trying to describe is that the process that we'll be working with MAPC is a much shorter schedule. And then we'll have all those changes in hand, and little by little we will prioritize them and bring them to town meeting. So for example, and I'm talking strictly hypothetically here, we could in November come with, here's our new site plan review process, here's 2 new categories of special permit. And do you want to approve those? Or we could come with, let's codify our general use district so that we can say this is a use district, and we can standardize that in dimensional tables with the other zoning districts that we have. And then next May, we could come with 2 or 3 more articles. But depending on how many changes we make, and town meeting happening every 6 months, it could take several years before we get through all of the housekeeping articles that we're looking. And it's also going to be a process to understand what people are looking for, the changes that they want to see. And, in forums like this, it takes a while to get residents up to speed on the shenanigans that we're up to here. So we want to be very careful, cautious, and clear through the whole process. So the MAPC project part is shorter than what the planning board will be working through over the next several years, probably, to be honest.
I think you may have just answered my next question. If it is proposed that there are substantive changes, such as residential districts, commercial districts, industrial districts, is that by approval at town meeting, or is it a townwide ballot vote, or is it?
It's all zoning bylaw changes are through town meeting. There's never a vote on it. The ballot votes are really only for fiscal articles. So the other thing with town meeting and bylaw votes is that they are 2/3. It's a supermajority to pass a bylaw article. So that's why getting consensus and outreach is really important for us.
Okay. And it might be too early to ask this question, but let's say in the case where there are substantive changes, such as these residential, industrial, commercial districts, any existing non-conforming uses, has there been talk about how those will be addressed?
Anything that exists when a bylaw is passed will be left in place. We just don't have the authority, nor does the state, to say, oh, we're kicking you out because you don't meet our new zoning district. So anything, existing uses will continue.
And would that be continuing for only the existing property owner, or for future?
That carries with the property.
Carries with the property, right. Thank you.
And not to cut us off with Q&A, but that was just a great segue to the engagement exercises So some of the boards are asking for your thoughts and input on prioritization of some of the proposed changes. And this will help give the planning board a better idea of which changes or where they should start as they start to take, as Lisa put it, the things that are stored in that drawer. Okay, based on feedback from the community, we should look at site plan review first, and then from there we should move to scenic roads. So I just wanted to highlight that that's the purpose of tonight's engagement activities.
How do we do that? So,
I didn't want to cut anyone off.
Oh, okay.
I just wanted to make sure there were no additional questions. He asked the question at the right time, so I figured I.
so are there more questions? Meg? Yep.
So the assistance that we've received so far from MAPC has been invaluable. So, and it's finite. So the devil really is in the details, and I think the really heavy lifting and difficult part is going to be when we start trying to divide the town up into zoning districts. And I'm wondering if you're anticipating any further assistance from another source when we get there.
I believe, and Courtney can correct me if I'm wrong, but the MAPC is going to help us start to look at what zoning districts could look like in town, because we do need some maps to start with. And even if it's the fear there is that if you start to draw a map, then people immediately react to it. But we do need to draw a map to start to have the conversation, or two versions of what that map could look like. So, Courtney, do you have anything to add to that?
I'll just say that what you were just describing is known as traditional zoning or Euclidean zoning, and that's where you have these very hard defined districts. There are some emerging best practices actually look at a hybrid of some of those traditional principles mixed with things like form-based code, which is more about the form and the build of structures. Some communities take a transect approach where development intensifies depending on the specific area of town that you're in. So it's usually, on the outskirts, more rural, and as you get closer to the center of town, that tends to be a bit more dense. And then there are some communities that use what's been called place types, and it provides these characteristic descriptions of a specific area without necessarily drawing geographic boundaries. So it talks about the types of structure, the look, the form, the feel of a specific area. And that also kind of ties into the engagement exercise. People often use words like charming or quaint or bucolic or to describe communities. And what we're hoping to get out of tonight's engagement exercise is to be able to tie those descriptive words to a geographic location in town, so that way we can start to formulate and structure language that supports or translates what some people would call fluffy language into, like, what does that mean in terms of regulations and zoning.
Are you familiar with any other zoning ordinances or bylaws that have sort of what sounds like a hybrid approach that we could be looking at, in anticipation?
Yes, there are a few and that's been a part of the process as well. Andrea and I have done research in different communities and presented the planning board with some options of other communities' approach. There are some areas in the U.S. that have been a bit more progressive in some of those other hybrid approaches in comparison to Massachusetts. But did somebody? I'm from the South, so sorry, that just threw me a bit. But I think when we last met with the planning and select board, we had a joint meeting and we presented the state actually has a website that has every community's zoning ordinance or bylaw listed, and we've provided that as a reference point, and we're looking, but we're also encouraging community members, the planning board, and to take a look and let us know if they see something that speaks to them as well. So
Courtney did speak about this sort of form-based zoning, and it's something new, and it's something I've been starting to read up on, and so we want to consider these other things because we have a really unique situation here in Essex that we don't have districts right now, and I think it's fair to acknowledge that actually drawing hard districts in town is going to be a very tricky thing to do because our town is already so integrated with businesses and residents together. So drawing districts will be, you're shaking your head, Meg, will be tricky. So I think some of these more innovative, flexible, form-based approaches might be a good solution for Essex in that we can still put some guardrails around what we want the town character to look like, what we want certain areas, the feel of certain areas, without necessarily saying, here's the line between commercial and residential or industrial. Actually, that's another thing worth mentioning is that you don't actually, if you start drawing zoning districts, you don't need to, there's nothing that requires you to have an industrial zoning district. There's nothing out there that says, okay, if you draw districts, you have to draw an industrial one somewhere or a commercial one somewhere. So there's a lot of flexibility in what we could or could not implement. So those are the kind of things that we're trying to look at because we acknowledge that drawing districts will be a challenge, but we also realize that there probably need to be a little bit better guardrails that will protect residential rural areas and people's homes.
Is there another question?
Again, thank you for all your work. This is a very concrete point and has to do with language and concision and clarity, which I hear are priorities for you. I'm a professional writer, and I had to look up recodification on Google while we were having this presentation tonight, and it just sounds like a rewriting when really it's just a reformatting. And I'm thinking that ahead of town meeting, is there just a way to not boggle people's minds with the word recodification?
I think, Brendan, correct me if I'm mistaken. I think on my handout, I've called it reorganization.
The overview. Yeah, I can put that up.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just think that if we want to get to the next phase,
We do.
I think we need to, since people
Yeah.
are so hesitant about change, we have to make it clear that this doesn't represent the tangible change. It's just a clearer way of looking at
Right, yeah.
things, right.
It's a first step, but to make change more manageable.
Right.
If and when we get to changes, we want to make sure they're more manageable, which is why we're reorganizing the bylaw into this new structure. So that's the handout.
Wonderful. Thank you.
And this handout is online.
This is
This
coming right
handout
from the
is-
town's
is-
website.
Yeah, that's online along with the 58-page reorganized bylaw. It's all there.
Okay, may not read all 58 pages, but thank you. Thank you.
I wouldn't either if I were you.
This is just a sample of what that looks like, and Lisa has gone through great lengths, along with others, to make it understandable. So,
Are there any other questions, or do you want to get to the engagement exercises? Engagement exercises. Isn't there an engagement specialist back there?
So Courtney sort of explained this, but on the first,
Andrea, can
gotta
you,
go on the mic.
okay, just a quick explanation. So there are two boards that have maps. One will ask where you live here in Essex, and that's just for us to get a better sense of geographic representation for tonight's event. The same question will be asked for those who participate or submit feedback online. Again, I apologize that the survey platform is not ready at this moment, but again, we are doing everything we can to make sure that that's up and running tomorrow, and you'll be reminded with a follow-up email from if you registered for tonight's event. But the second map will ask you to provide 3 words that describe the character or of a place that is meaningful or important to you. And again, you can see this as an example. This will help us start to create language that really starts to translate what it is that you're describing into actual regulations, or it'll help us to start decode some of the that more descriptive language.
just a quick update about that one. We're going to put it on one of these tables so that it's flat surface level, so it's not up currently. But we are going to put it. Yeah, we can put it. Oh, sorry. So we are going to put this map that Courtney's talking about on one of the tables that are behind us. We just haven't set it up so it's not in our way while we're doing this part, so that way it will be flat and you don't have to look at it. You don't have to work on it in this setup. So it's not up yet, but once we adjourn to the engagement exercises, it will be.
All right. Next slide. And the second set of boards will start to look at some of the priorities that we kind of talked through, and it also provides space for you to add comments on things that weren't mentioned. Again, the proposed amendments or suggested amendments that are posted were gathered through feedback. So just because it's not something that's listed does not mean that it's not something that won't or can't be addressed. So that's why we ask for comments and feedback. And if there are specific elements or components of these topic areas that you would like for us to take a deeper look at, please also provide that in your comments. And again, this will be available virtually as well for feedback.
But not right now.
No.
Just to be clear for people. And can you tell the folks that are with us remotely where they should look to get into the virtual experience for this?
Yes. So in addition to a link being sent via email, a link will also be posted on the project webpage, which is on the last slide, which will pop up in just a moment. And it will also, I'm sure the town will also provide links to that site.
Yeah, our town site links to the project webpage. And I'll show people. You can go to, see what, right here, when you load the site, stay up to date on, no, that's Apple Street. The zoning thing, right here. And then the dedicated website link is right here. And it takes you to this, and this is where the new virtual experience will end up being.
And that site, just for anyone, is mapc.ma/Essex zoning. Can we go back to the slideshow just for a moment? This is our contact information, both Andrea and myself. So if you have questions or would like to participate as a zoning ambassador or just learn more about the process, please feel free to reach out at our emails. And again, I want to thank everyone for participating, for coming out, and for bearing with us through getting situated.
So Courtney, at this point in time, for the people that have joined us remotely, I believe the presentation will end and the Zoom meeting will actually end, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so unless there's anything else to coordinate with Andrea, I want to thank Andrea for working the Zoom presentation behind the scenes. Andrea, I think we can end the presentation in Zoom.
Thank you. So folks here in the room, we do have these boards up for this interactive part. If you want to take a look at them and provide some feedback, that would be awesome. And there's still more cookies.